Welcome to a new episode of Out from the Horrorbox. And today we are getting into the second part of our Friday the 13th series. So, last episode, we looked at the first three movies. We went over the kind of the conception of the film, the initial film, and then we looked at the two subsequent sequels. So Friday the 13th, Friday the 13th Part 2, and Part 3. And we talked about a little bit of, the production behind that, some of the casting. We got into some of the trivia behind it. And I think with the series going forward, we're going to get into a little bit more and discuss it even more, especially when we get to wrap it up in the fourth part, because this is a long series, and the best way to divide it up was in three movie sections per part. So that's going to be four parts. So yeah, what I want to start off with though, really quick, before we get into the next three movies, I do want to kind of recap everything from the last episode, the previous films, just so that everybody understands, especially if you're, I'm not going to say if you wanted to skip the other episode. I really wish you would go back and listen to it. I was a little sick when I recorded it, so I mean there is that. But also, it's not necessary. I guess if you just wanted to just jump into the next three, if these are your favorites, or maybe one of them is your favorite, and you just kind of wanted to jump into it, but you still kind of wanted a recap. I know that there's some people out there who might just start with this next part, but also it is to kind of catch you up a little bit. Even if you do know the films, it is good to just kind of recap everything. So let me jump into that. Friday the 13th is an American horror franchise that comprises 12 slasher films, a television series, novels, comic books, video games, and tie-in merchandise. The franchise mainly focuses on the fictional character Jason Voorhees, who was thought to have drowned as a boy at Camp Crystal Lake due to the negligence of the camp staff. Decades later, the lake is rumored to be cursed and is the setting for a series of mass murders. Jason is featured in all of the films as either the killer or the motivation for the killings. The original film, created to cash in on the success of the film Halloween, was written by Victor Miller and was produced and directed by Sean S. Cunningham. In the original Friday the 13th, Mrs. Voorhees stalks and murders the teenagers that are preparing Camp Crystal Lake for a reopening. She's determined to ensure that the camp does not reopen since her son, Jason, drowned in the lake. It was due to negligence of the staff members who were having sex at the time. The last counselor, Alice Hardy, fends off Mrs. Voorhees long enough to grab a machete and decapitate her. In this first sequel, Friday the 13th Part 2, Jason is revealed to be alive and fully grown. After seeing his mother murdered and killing Alice Hardy, the survivor from the first film, Jason returns to Camp Crystal Lake to guard it from all intruders. 5 years later, when Crystal Lake is set to open up again, Jason sets out to murder them. Jenny Field, the last counselor Jason attempts to kill, finds a cabin in the woods with a shrine built around the severed head of Mrs. Voorhees. Jenny fights back and slams a machete through Jason's shoulder. Jason is left for dead as Jenny is taken away in an ambulance. In Friday the 13th Part 3, Jason removes the machete from his shoulder and finds his way to Chris Higgins' local homestead. Chris returns to her property with some friends, and Jason kills them off one by one. Taking a hockey mask from one of his victims, Jason sets out to kill the rest of the group. Chris seemingly kills Jason with an axe to his head, but the night's events drive her into hysteria as the police take her away. So now we have reached this point in the series where the third part leaves us off to the fourth part, obviously, But now we have the iconic Jason, the one that is the hockey mask, machete wielding mass murderer that we know and love. Going forward, this is how we'll know him because prior to this, the first film obviously had Mrs. Voorhees as the killer, and the second one had Jason, but he had that like sack over his head with the one eye, so he could look out. I guess no depth perception. I guess, but this is the Jason we'll see from now on. I mean, it's not the definitive version, the one that everyone has exactly in their head. I mean, I think when people picture Jason, they either think of the one from part 3 or they think of like, I'd say maybe, we'll get to it, but probably like the 6th film or maybe like the 7th film, going into like the 8th. And that's kind of how everyone kind of pictures him. Is this? Well, I'll just kind of get into it a little bit, but this kind of zombie Jason-esque, hulking figure that walks around that can't die. Because we've seen him before in the second one and this one, and the third one, and he's just kind of been this hulking monster. But we'll get into it, and we'll get into like why a lot of things will change with just these 3 next films. You'll see one version of Jason, another version of Jason, and then finally the Jason that I think most people have in their mind, that's in the zeitgeist. That's what pop culture constantly portrays. So let's start with the first entry in what is the Tommy Jarvis trilogy, a trilogy that is just in the middle of this full franchise of 12 films. So let's jump right in.
Three times before, you have felt the terror, known the madness, lived the horror. But this is the one you've been screaming for. Friday the 13th, the final chapter. Jason is back. He moves like a shadow, dark and silent.
Sorry you changed your mind?
He never utters a word. He doesn't even seem to breathe.
Where the hell's the corkscrew?
He simply, mindlessly, mercilessly kills. But now, Jason's reign of terror is over. Friday the 13th, the final chapter. Friday, April 13th, is Jason's unlucky day.
Friday the 13th, the final chapter, is a 1984 American slasher film directed by Joseph Zito, produced by Frank Mancuso Jr. The night after the events in Higgins Haven, police clean up the grounds and Jason Voorhees' body, believed to be dead, is taken to the morgue. Jason spontaneously revives and escapes from the cold storage of the hospital, murdering the coroner Axel Burns with a hacksaw and gutting Nurse Robbie Morgan with a scalpel. The following day, a group of teenagers drives to Crystal Lake for the weekend. The group consists of Paul, his girlfriend Sam, Virgin Sarah, her boyfriend Doug, Awkward Jimmy, and Jokester Ted. On the way, the group comes across Pamela Voorhees' tombstone and a hitchhiker who Jason soon kills. The teens arrive and meet neighbors Trish Jarvis, her 12-year-old brother Tommy, and the family dog Gordon. While going for a walk the next day, the teens meet twin sisters Tina and Terry Moore and go skinny dipping with them. Trish and Tommy happen upon the scene, and Trish is invited to the party taking place that night. Afterward, when their car breaks down, Trish and Tommy are helped out by a young man named Rob Deere. They take him to their house, where he meets their mother. Tommy soon shows him several monster masks he made before Rob leaves to go camping. Later that night, the teens begin the party. A jealous Sam sees Tina flirting with Paul and leaves. She goes to the lake, where Jason impales her with a spear from under a raft. When Paul goes out to look for her, he is harpooned in the groin. Terry tries to leave the party early, but Jason stabs her with a spear before she can get onto her bike. Mrs. Jarvis arrives home and discovers that there is a power outage. While searching for her children and Gordon, she is killed off-screen. Trish and Tommy soon arrive and realize their mother is missing. Trish goes to search for her and finds Rob's campsite. It is revealed that Rob is actually the brother of Sandra Deere from the second installment. Rob further explains to her that Jason is still alive and he came to Crystal Lake to avenge his sister's death. Worried about Tommy's safety, Trish and Rob return to the house. After sleeping with Tina, Jimmy goes downstairs to get a bottle of wine. Jason pins his hand with a corkscrew before striking his face with a meat cleaver. Tina looks out a window upstairs and finds that her sister's bike is still there. Jason then bursts through the window and throws her to her death, crashing onto the car while Stone Ted watches stag films with a film projector. He gets too close to the projector screen and is stabbed in the head with a kitchen knife from the other side. Jason then goes upstairs where Doug and Sarah finish making love in the shower. After Sarah leaves, Jason kills Doug by crushing his head against the shower tile. When Sarah screams upon finding Doug's body, she tries to escape but gets a double-bit axe through her chest. Trish, Rob, and Gordon go next door to investigate and discover the teens' bodies. Gordon flees, and Jason kills Rob in the basement as Trish runs home. Taking Rob's machete, she and Tommy barricade the house, but Jason breaks in and chases them into Tommy's room. Trish lures Jason out of the house and escapes, then returns home and is devastated to learn that Tommy did not run away. She senses Jason behind her and tries to fight him off with a machete, but is overpowered. Having disguised himself to look like Jason as a child, Tommy distracts him long enough for Trish to hit him with the machete, but she merely whacks off his mask. As Trish stands horrified at Jason's deformed face, Tommy takes the machete and strikes it in the side of his skull, causing him to collapse on the floor and split his head upon impact. When Tommy notices that Jason's fingers are slightly moving, he continues to hack at his body, screaming, "Die! Die!" while Trish repeatedly yells out his name. At the hospital, Tommy visits Trish. He rushes in, embraces her, and gives a disturbed look while staring into the camera. So, Part 3, Friday the 13th Part 3, was supposed to be the end to as a trilogy. The series is a trilogy, so it would have been just 1, 2, 3, Friday the 13th Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. And, if that had been the case, and I honestly don't think they would have not kept going with this. I think they would have done this film either way. Even if it would have been like, oh, it's dead and it's buried and stuff, blah, blah, blah. I think after like a little bit, I think they would have just come back and been like, hey, you know what? We're going to do another one. I think it was inevitable for them to do at least one more. And I think the reason is just money. They knew that they could make a lot of money, and that they had so much invested in this in the first 3, and I think that they were just like, let's just do another one, and we could just bill it as the final chapter. And that they I think most of them kind of just wanted to wrap things up too and move on. I think especially because at this point we'd seen from Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel from at the movies that they'd been talking about how the slasher genre had been declining at that point. So I think it was kind of them, and then so like Frank Mancuso Jr. They just kind of wanted to be done with it. They kind of resented the series. They felt like nobody respected them for working on part 2, part 3, and then finally I think that's why they were just kind of like, you know what, it does make a lot of money, but let's kind of move on to other projects. And they just wanted to conclude the series by killing off Jason. Something I will applaud, this film for doing, which, is notated, that, most of the time slasher films will, favor young women being, like, the final girl. That's what we get. We get the Scream Queens. And I think by having someone a little bit different, someone like Tommy Jarvis, this little kid being the one who takes down Jason and is like the final, I guess you could just say the final person, is a change of pace. It's something you don't really see very often. I mean, you don't really even see like a final guy to begin with. I think it's because in our society, at least for America, women are the ones that we see as in danger a lot. I mean, they are in real life, but I think this helps to show that like it's not just this one certain set of people, that it's also like, okay, like this little kid, and how I think also you'll see in the next 2 films how I think they could have done so much more too with this character later. But I think these 3 films show like the progression of like this effect of going through this trauma has on a person. I don't think it does it fully effectively, but I think it does it enough to be like, oh shoot, like, oh yeah, of course that's why he would be here, why he would be there. Halloween does it pretty good with Jamie Lee Curtis's character. They did it with in H2O, and then the recent Halloween trilogy that's just come out. And you hardly get to see like that effect, and Scream does it really good too. You get to see like how it changes these people who go through these things, and sometimes we don't get to see that a lot, especially with the first 3, because there's no real main character. There's no Jamie Lee Curtis. There's no Nev Campbell. There's no even like Jennifer Love Hewitt. From I think what is it? I still know what you did, or I know what you did last summer. And so there's no person that we have to hold on to for these first 3 films that carry us through and show us like, oh, I know how to deal with Jason. They tried to do it with the 3rd one because I think they wanted to bring back from the 2nd film, but it just kind of feels weird. And it's like I think they just wanted to hold like these people. They wanted to bring these people over. But it just doesn't work. They don't get them for when they need them, so they end up having to move on to new characters, and you have to create this backstory that we don't really get to see in this one film. So I think, and you'll see with the next 2, like I said, this progression for this one character, I think kind of helps these 3 films. So to get into a little bit of trivia, I didn't know this, but parts 2, 3, and 4 take place over the course of just 5 days. And during that time, Jason kills 34 people. That is crazy. Just imagine, like, this hockey mask wearing killer just, like, rampaging through this area. I can see why in later installments they'd rename like the town and stuff just to kind of get away from that. That's kind of crazy. 34 people. Crazy. This is something we'll get into a little bit later in the series, especially once it kind of jumps ahead and then gets a little bit further on. But this is actually the first film in the series to take place in the year it was released. So according to the grave, Pamela Voorhees' grave in the film, Friday the 13th takes place in 1979, but it was released in 1980. Friday the 13th Part 2 which was released in 1981, takes place 5 years later after the original one, which would place it in 1984. Friday the 13th Part 3, which came out in 1982, takes place the day after Part 2. And this movie takes place the day after Part 3, so which would place it in 1984. Which is kind of crazy. Did not know that. Yeah, so like it's gonna get kind of crazier too with the timeline, and you're gonna, especially with the next one, you're gonna see why. But the series really doesn't care about like the year it actually is supposed to be compared to when it came out. So this one closes with a brutal death for Jason. We see his head slowly descend upon the blade of the machete. But the crazy thing is the previous three ended on these kind of fake out dream sequence conclusion that kind of made you like question like, oh, is there gonna be another one? Ooh. And they actually filmed one and then they kind of scrapped it. So that means that there's an official version of the final chapter that does reveal what became of Trish and Tommy's mother, whose death is implied but never depicted. But thanks to some efforts by Daniel Ferrans and Joseph Zito, the original ending has been restored as much as possible. The deleted scene, however, reminded viewers too much of the first and third film's endings, and we'll get into a little bit about it in the sixth film. But they kind of confirm that, Tommy's mother did get killed by Jason. To kind of lead off from that, in the original script, Tommy was supposed to decapitate Jason with a machete. The filmmakers decided against it just in case they wanted to bring Jason back, which kind of also shows you like they're kind of they were done with the series, right? But they were still hesitant to just kill this character off. But honestly, even when they were like, he's dead, definitively dead. They still were like, let's bring him back, guys. We can't. It was kind of like the Michael Myers effect, I think. And you'll see that with the next film. But yeah, I think that killing off Jason was not a great idea. It's an interesting idea, and it's interesting to see like where you could go from there. And I think they could have pulled it off a little bit better, but they just couldn't go through it. And they knew it because people would see the next one and want Jason back. And although, they figured out a way to bring him back, and I think it's a really interesting way to bring him back, especially when you're like, yeah, he's dead. He's dead. And that's like what you said in this one, like, he is dead. And you said in the next one, too. So, honestly, I think they could have just gone for it, and they could have still brought him back. But, it is what it is. So there's one scene in here that everyone likes to bring up, and that's the strange dance which Jimbo performs at the party, and it was contributed by actor Crispin Glover, and was based on the way he actually danced in clubs. He on set he was dancing to "Back in Black" by AC/DC when they filmed the scene. However, in the scene in the film, they took that out and they put in "Love Is a Lie" by Lion, and it was dubbed into the scene. But that's just kind of weird that he dances eccentrically like that. I mean, I guess it's not really weird. I mean, that's how he dances. It's how he wants to dance. He can dance however he wants. Just a little weird, and everyone always brings that up. Like, why is he dancing like that? Although it is like, why are you dancing like that to "Back in Black"? But I guess that's how he actually dances. So to wrap up the trivia on this and the production for this film, and trying to move on to the next one, let's talk about how Tom Savini came back. He hadn't been on the previous two sequels. He did the special effects for Friday the 13th part. Well, the first one, Friday the 13th. we talked about how like he's the one who he did the arrow piercing through Kevin Bacon's neck, and then there's he did all the special effects for it, and then we got to see his hands at the end because it was him who was wearing the fake head that they decapitated. That was Mrs. Voorhees. And Tommy's interest in makeup effects serve as a homage to Tom Savini himself. I mean, I think they use a lot of the props and masks and things he's created in the film too, and just goes to show that the series really does love the fact that he started off in the first one and then came back for this one, and they really showed hey, here's a way to honor him. And I think that's why the character's name is Tommy. I mean, right? Tom Savini, Tommy. But they may have just named him that. I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe I didn't see anywhere saying that that's exactly what that was for, the name was for. But hey, you know what? Tom Savini is a great effects guy, and I can't wait to talk about more films that he's done effects for, because they're pretty good. I mean, they're not just pretty good, they're pretty great. So let's get moving on to the next film.
If the memory of Jason still haunts you, you're not alone. Friday the 13th, Part 5, A New Beginning.
Severe trauma at age 12. Brutal self-defense, murder of a psychopathic killer. Boy, they've given him every therapy they can think of. It's wonder his mind isn't fried with all the drugs they've given him.
The mindless, murderous fury that was buried with Jason has been reborn.
Pete!
And suddenly, terror has become child's play. Friday the 13th, Part 5, A New Beginning.
Friday the 13th, A New Beginning is a 1985 American psychological slasher film directed by Danny Steinman. Several years after the death of Jason Voorhees, a teenage Tommy Jarvis is tormented by nightmares of the mass murderer, resulting in his internment in numerous psychiatric hospitals. He is eventually transferred to the Pinehurst halfway house, managed by Dr. Matt Lutter and his assistant, Ann Roberts. There, Tommy meets a circle of other teens, including lovers Eddie Kelso and Tina McCarthy, the stutterer Jake Patterson, the goth Violet Murray, the serious Robin Brown, the compulsive eater Joey Burns, and the young Reggie Winter, whose grandfather George Winter works as the facility's cook. The group is disliked by their neighbor Ethel Hubbard, as Eddie and Tina have made it a habit of engaging in sexual intercourse on her property. For this reason, Matt forbids the group from venturing outside the facility's premises. Vic Faden, another patient at the Institute, is gripped by a fit of madness caused by Joey's constant pestering and brutally kills him with an axe, leading to his arrest. That evening, two greasers, Vinny and Pete, are murdered by an unseen assailant after their car breaks down. and a diner waitress and her boyfriend are killed the following night. The sheriff hypothesizes that Jason Voorhees has come back to life and is the perpetrator of these murders, while Tommy himself is rendered a suspicious party. The next morning, Eddie and Tina disobediently go into the forest and have sex. They are spotted by Ethel's farmhand Raymond Joffrey, who is killed soon after. After returning from washing off in the creek, Eddie finds that Tina has been murdered, and he soon meets the same fate. Meanwhile, Reggie begs his grandfather for a visit to his brother Demon, who has just returned to town, and Pam offers to accompany him while bringing Tommy along. As Pam and Reggie enjoy some enchiladas with Demon and his girlfriend, Tommy meets Ethel's son Junior and gets in a fight with him, but then runs away into the forest after realizing his actions. After Pam and Reggie leave to find Tommy, Demon has a severe case of diarrhea from the enchiladas and runs into an outhouse. While using the outhouse, he and his girlfriend are slaughtered. Upon Pam and Reggie's return to the Institute, they are warned of the disappearance of Matt and Reggie's grandfather. Pam goes searching for them, entrusting Reggie to Violet, Jake, and Robin. At this time, Ethel and Junior are killed, as are Jake, Robin, and Violet, after Reggie falls asleep. Reggie awakens just as Pam returns, and they discover the trio's corpses in Tommy's room. Moments later, the killer, seemingly a resurrected Jason Voorhees, bursts into the house. After a long chase in which Pam and Reggie find the corpses of Matt and Reggie's grandfather, Jason is struck by a tractor and then lured into a barn. Tommy returns and is attacked by Jason but defends himself. Eventually, Tommy throws Jason from the loft window onto a tractor harrow, killing him instantly. In the process, the killer's hockey mask comes off, revealing that he is, in fact, Roy Burns, one of the paramedics who arrived at the scene of Joey's murder. The police later identified Roy as Joey's father and determined that he went insane after his son's death and sought revenge, inspired by the stories of Jason's killing sprees. While recovering from the hospital, Tommy has another hallucination of Jason, but he faces his fears and makes him disappear. He then hears Pam approaching and smashes the window to appear as though he has escaped. When Pam rushes in, Tommy appears from behind the door wearing Roy's hockey mask and wielding a kitchen knife. So of course when you have a long-going series of movies and you have multiple parts and you just keep pumping them out one after another, especially one that comes after what is called the final chapter, that's when you get a movie like this. So this one was cast under a fake title called Repetition. Many of the actors were not aware that this was going to be a Friday the 13th installment until obviously later when they started, getting into the role. John Shepard, who was amongst the cast who were unaware that this was going to be a Friday the 13th movie, he spent months volunteering at a mental hospital to prepare for the role, and he felt really disappointed when he learned that Repetition wasn't going to be the standalone film, was actually going to be the fifth Friday the 13th. And I would be just sad too, like you spend all this time working on this character and then you learn, oh, it's not what I thought it was. I mean, it's a little understandable from the producer's side why they would call it Repetition, so that obviously no one would know what they're actually going to film, especially when you just ended the series not too long before. So I could see where they're coming from, like a kind of like a Blue Harvest with Star Wars, to kind of keep people away from the set. But at the same time, you're also not explaining to these people prior to like what they're getting themselves into, so they're preparing for a whole different role than they're supposed to be preparing for, and that is a little underwhelming, I will say, on his behalf. So like the many other sequels that came before this one was supposed to be a continuation from the straight up from where the first one left off. I mean, for the for the prior one left off, And that was no different with this one. So they were originally going to have Corey Feldman as the star. He was going to reprise his role of Tommy Jarvis as a young man again, or young boy. But obviously, he was filming the Goonies, and they couldn't get him away from that. So they had to rewrite the script and have him disappear as a limited cameo. And actually he was just like in his neighbor's backyard when he filmed that, like really quickly. That little part that's at the beginning that it cuts to, like the jump cut to him as a like a teenager, and it's kind of crazy because it's like, yeah, like when you look at the original four, it's literally like the next day, the next, or that, and then the next month or the next whatever. It's like literally like one after the other, and this one is the first one to kind of jump ahead and and you kind of see hints of this weird timeline. Yeah, even though it came out in '85, because of that time jump, it's actually set in 1989. So from here on, now all of the movies will be kind of set further ahead of when they are. I think when it finally kind of resets it or gets back to where it's supposed to be, that is, I think, with Freddy versus Jason. So that's getting way ahead of ourselves. We still have a lot to get through till we get to that point. But yeah, isn't that kind of a little crazy that this movie is kind of jumping ahead in like when it's set, and then when you think about like the movies to come and when they're set, it's like I don't think they really thought that through when they jumped ahead. They maybe should have waited for Tommy Jarvis to get, or I mean Tommy Jarvis, God, for um, Corey Feldman to get a little older, and then come back, and maybe then you could do another sequel, and then you could kind of set it a little bit, maybe a little bit ahead. But this kind of pushes it ahead. This pushes it ahead 4 years. I think the next couple ones kind of push it ahead as well, even more so. So, well, we'll watch out for that. Obviously, I'll bring it up again. Tommy's opening dream was different in the original script as well, and it made him out to be more of a suspect later on than the film actually did. So this was supposed to be a continuation from the previous film, Final Chapter, where a young Tommy Jarvis is taken to the same hospital that Jason is his corpse is at. You know, they're at the hospital. He's down in the morgue, and in a fit of psychotic rage, Tommy just goes on a killing spree, attacking half of the hospital, trying to get to the morgue to find Jason's bloody body. Once he finally finds the body, though, Jason suddenly rises from the autopsy table, and immediately after, that's when, bam, that's when Tommy wakes up as an adult, and that's when he's going to Pinehurst, and yeah, it really would have kind of made him look a little bit more psychotic, because it would have been like, okay, in his thoughts, he's trying to kill this person that he killed prior, and he just can't get it out of his head, and it's causing him to have these crazy like fits. Although I think if that would have been in the film, it would have made it a little bit more disappointing that it's Roy instead of Tommy, because you're seeing all the setup, right? And like, or you would have seen this great setup for this character to turn like psychotic, and in the end, it to be this one character who was there, I think like twice before, and to see that they are the killer now is a little underwhelming, and would have made it more underwhelming then, and I think more people would have been upset with this film. One thing I didn't even know about is that, and it's actually kind of easy to miss, is that this is actually the first film, so part 5 in the franchise, to refer to Jason by his full name, Jason Voorhees. In the first, second, and fourth films, they only refer to him as Jason. And I did not even know this, but in the third film, they don't even refer to him by name at all. They don't call him Jason. They don't call him that like the Voorhees kid or anything like that. It's very strange when because like they're so iconic as like they're even just the name Jason, right? But that would be like in a Michael Myers, God, in a Halloween film, them not calling him Michael Myers throughout the whole film would be strange, or even Michael, or bring up like like any of that would be a little strange when you think about it. Like you're going through this whole film and no one says their first name, or even like a Nightmare on Elm Street, and none of them say Freddy or Freddy Krueger or any of that. You just go through the whole film without hearing the character's name. It was a little weird. Never even didn't even like come to my mind when I was watching the third film that they never even said his name. The movie's title, A New Beginning, was chosen because it had been decided that Tommy would become the killer after his encounters with Jason, especially in Friday the 13th, the final chapter, and then this one was kind of supposed to push him towards the edge. Danny Steinman, the director, was instructed to do two things, in this movie. More shocks, more scares, more kills, try and get that out like every like 7 or 8 minutes as much as you can, but also more importantly to turn Tommy into Jason. And the ending where he's about to kill Pam was not originally meant to be interpreted as a dream, and was instead to show Tommy had gone crazy after the encounters with Jason. The plot twist, though, was abandoned when fans demanded Jason's return, and thus he was resurrected in, spoiler, Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives. If it had gone the way that he wanted, the producers would have brought John Shepard and Melanie Kinnaman back for a direct sequel, and probably would have had Tommy as the new Jason, the new killer, probably in this area, probably killing people. I mean, you could even have ended it with another one where it's Tommy's that Jarvis boy gone crazy or something. I don't know, something like that. You could have done something a little bit like that. It would have been a little strange. It's funny how this and Halloween have a little bit of similarities, because there is, and I'll touch on that once I get to Halloween, this franchise, but they do have a character who is affected by this killer, who's then driven to presumably kill someone that they love, and then the next direct movie kind of contradicts that and says, "Oh, no, like they're actually alive, and we're not going to go that way because people are upset." Because they did that with Jamie, Danielle Harris's character in the fourth Halloween, the Return of Michael Myers, and then Revenge of Michael Myers, the fifth film. They decided to just completely, like they did with this, they just completely abandoned that plot, because I think they audiences were just like, doesn't make any sense. This is kind of dumb. Why would you do this? I mean, it is. I mean, if they had pulled it off a really good way, and in the next film, kind of gone along with that and explored, like trauma and like why these characters decided to kill. You could have given us a good movie, and I just think that some people just want. A lot of times, people just want the same thing. They just want, like with the Alien franchise, you try and give them a little bit more, like with Prometheus, something to explore and to think about. But all they really want is more xenomorphs, and then you're ended up having to make a compromise and give them a half sequel to Prometheus and a half prequel to Alien. With Alien, what was the Alien? Oh, I forgot what the one that Covenant. That's what it is, and it just does not work. It's just like trying to do too much all at once. But I, I think you could have done something good with and explored something with that, but I think the way that they pulled it off just didn't work, especially with like Roy. I think that's what kind of left a lot of people's like the bad taste in people's mouth, because it is an interesting idea of having someone else killing when they're thinking it's Jason, but it's not, obviously. And you're having like these like copycat murders, right? That's such an interesting idea, but I think it's just the way that it was executed just did not. It just missed the mark for these films. One way to tell that this movie is foreshadowing that their killer is not Jason is that the markings on the mask, the chevrons, are not red. They're actually blue in this film, and I think they did that intentionally to showcase, like, if you're paying attention, you can tell this isn't the actual Jason that went around the prior years massacring people at Camp Blood or Crystal Lake. So overall for this film, I would say probably not one of the better ones, especially because, I do like when they try and switch things up. They try and do something a little bit different, give us somebody different than just Jason Voorhees to be the killer. Like the first one, right? Like, it's crazy that there's only been 2 movies where the killer isn't Jason, and they try to do something a little bit different, but overall I think it just kind of falls flat because, one, the killer is someone that's not really set up really well, and then 2, you're kind of setting things up to be kind of Tommy Jarvis, but then you don't fully go through with that either. And he's not even featured too much in this movie. I think he only has like a couple lines of dialogue also. So not only are you cutting out Jason, but you're cutting out Tommy Jarvis. I think one of the characters that I think should have remained, and he'll be in the next film, but he should have remained throughout this series, because I think that's kind of what the series needed. It needed someone to step in and be like the Jamie Lee Curtis or the Heather Langenkamp, like someone to kind of guide the series so you can see where, not guide it, but to anchor the series in a character we're familiar with, someone that we know, someone that we can grow to be like, oh yeah, come on, we want to see you win, rather than Jason. I think these 3 films perfectly encapsulate what it should have been, and then when they got rid of the character and they started just giving us random characters every other film again, I think that's kind of what set it apart, to make it so it's like, yeah, I guess we'll just root for Jason because Jason's the only thing that keeps coming back. So let's get into the next one and see where Tommy Jarvis goes from here.
This is between me and Jason. Jason belongs in hell, and I'm gonna see he gets there. Jason's alive. We dug up his body. You gotta do something.
No one in Forest Green wants to be reminded of what that maniac did here. That's why we changed the name. People want to forget this was Crystal Lake.
Just because our parents keep telling us that Jason was only a legend doesn't mean it wasn't true. What if he did come back here? Looking for the camp counselor that caused him to drown his wife.
Friday the 13th is a 1986 Sometime after the events, Tommy Jarvis is released from the mental institution, despite still having suspicions of the mass murderer Jason Voorhees, whom he killed years ago. He returns to Crystal Lake, now renamed Forest Green, to confront his fears, alongside his friend Alan Thomas. The pair visit Jason's grave during Thunderstorm, hoping to cremate the killer's body and finally end Tommy's nightmares. After digging up Jason's corpse, Tommy experiences flashbacks of his last encounter with Jason and fiercely impales the body with a metal fence post. Just as two lightning bolts strike the post, causing Jason to come back to life as an immortal remnant. Jason proceeds to kill Hans and don his hockey mask, which Tommy brought with him. Tommy flees to the sheriff's station to warn the police of Jason's return, only to be arrested and jailed. His warning of Jason's return goes unheeded by Sheriff Mike Jarvis, who is aware of Tommy's institutionalization and thinks he is hallucinating Jason's return. On the road, camp counselors Darren Robinson and Elizabeth Mott get lost in the camp forest and found by Jason, who murders them both. The following morning, Garris' daughter Megan and friends Sissy Baker and neighbors Paul Mott arrive at the police station and report Darren and Elizabeth missing. Tommy warns them about Jason, but as he is now considered an urban legend, they ignore the warnings. The Morgan grows attracted to him. In the woods, Jason happens upon a focused and he kills all 5 members, 3 members of the decapitation, thus the 4th member's face into a tree, and this member is the 5th member. Then he steals Machete's face and in the process discovering that he now possesses superhuman strength as a result of his resurrection. Camp Forest Green, children arrive and the team do their best to run the trains without Darren and Elizabeth. Meanwhile, Garris decides to escort Tommy out of his jurisdiction due to his injuries on Morgan. On the way, Tommy tries to make a run for Jason's grave and finds that the caretaker had covered up to deny responsibility for it being dug up, and Hans's body is buried in its place. Tommy is then handcuffed and escorted out of town by Garris, who has warned him never to return. That night, Jason murders the caretaker and a nearby couple who witnessed the murder. Meanwhile, Court goes out to have sex with a woman named Philip Parsley, but Jason kills them both. The sheriff's men find the victims' bodies, and Garris immediately implicates Tommy in the murder, believing he is honestly imagining Jason. Tommy contacts Megan and convinces her to help him lure Jason back to Camp Crystal Lake. Meanwhile, Jason makes his way to the camp and kills both Sissy and Paul, who refrains from harming the children. Meanwhile, Tommy and Megan are pulled over by Garris. Despite Megan's alibi that she is with Tommy, he does not believe him to be innocent and arrests him, and he goes to the camp to arrest him. As Tommy and Megan develop a relationship, Deputy Rick and escape, Jason kills Garris and 2 other deputies when they arrive at the camp. Jason is about to kill Megan when Tommy calls to him from the lake. Apparently remembering his killer, Jason goes after Tommy instead. Tommy is attacked in a boat in the middle of the lake and ties a boulder around Jason's neck to trap him. Jason fights back, holding Tommy underwater long enough to see him drown. Megan rushes out to save him, but is only killed when Jason grabs her leg. She turns the boat's activated motor around onto Jason's neck and he releases her. She takes Tommy back to shore and uses CPR to revive him. Tommy says that it's finally over and that Jason is dead. Under the water, Jason is shown to be still alive, albeit anchored to the bottom of the lake. Okay, so let's get into some of the production. Even though the previous film, Friday the 13th, A New Beginning, was a success, it disappointed the series fans and received some of the worst reviews. So that caused Frank Mancuso Jr. To kind of course correct from A New Beginning and that's why he hired Tom McLaughlin, even though he had directed a successful horror film, one Dark Knight. He was shopping around a lot of comedy films, and Frank Mancuso Jr. kind of like that, like idea of, this dichotomy of, funny and horror. So he reached out to him and kind of gave him free reign for the story, but he just gave him one condition: you got to bring Jason back and make him the villain. McLaughlin said he decided to take the film into the direction of a old Universal monster movie, specifically the 1931 version of Frankenstein, and which portrays the monster as a lumbering killer brought to life by electricity. He also drew on vampire lore in order to give Jason a weakness, namely being buried in his home soil. To achieve this, they disregarded the idea that, in part two, that Jason survived drowning, instead presenting the idea that he's always been some sort of like supernatural force. I think kind of like a Michael Myers type of thing, where he's known as the Shape. In the first film, they call him Michael Myers, but he's known as the Shape. In the credits, that's what he's credited as. And they also decided to retcon the ending of the previous film, where Tommy Jarvis was the serial killer. In fact, Pam's truck from the film, the scene, and so we know she's alive right now, or at least in this film. And it gets confirmed in the Friday the 13th, the game, where it's explained that the ending from the previous film was specifically a dream. McLaughlin further decided to expand on the series' thematic scope, incorporating action film elements, postmodern meta humor. When Jason's first encountered in the woods near Crystal Lake, the character Elizabeth comments that she and Darren should flee because she knows about proper conduct to survive a horror film. McLaughlin would later further satirize the series itself, as Martin, the gravedigger, comments on Jason's exhumation. Why they have to go dig up Jason, before breaking the fourth wall and addressing the camera with the observation, "Some folks sure got a strange idea of entertainment." And then, including Frankenstein, he also had inspiration from Gothic horror, particularly Edgar Allan Poe, and he also cited his Catholic upbringing. He said that he found himself in contention with the producers over how the film should end. The original script called for the movie to conclude in the graveyard with Martin the Gravedigger meeting Jason's father, Elias, a character that we'd never seen before, with the implications that Elias knows Jason has been resurrected and has come looking for him. But, producers in the studios, they kind of were like, that's kind of dumb. They didn't want the responsibility of having to introduce the Elias's backstory in the next installment, because I think they kind of had an idea for like a formula of how they were going to start keeping these movies afloat. So I don't think they kind of wanted to start getting into like, well, we start adding lore here and there. Like, we're going to have to start making these movies a little bit different. We can't just cookie cutter them anymore. Additionally, the added murder of Martin made the scene a continuity error. Plus, the ending would have tied up a continuity error from the previous film, A New Beginning. It's mentioned that Jason was cremated. A deleted scene from this film, Jason Lives, had Tommy asking Sheriff Garris why Jason wasn't cremated, as he had been planned to be, at which point Garris informs him that someone paid the city to bury Jason. We would have seen Elias handing Martin a wad of money, which would have indicated that he was the man who paid for Jason's burial. The scene was storyboarded for inclusion in the film, but it didn't make it in. But it is on the DVD, the deluxe edition, so you can see the storyboards if you'd like to kind of see like what that scene would have been like. Alright, so let's get into a little bit of the trivia behind this. Many years after the release of this film, Kevin Williamson, who, would later go on to write Scream, Curse, The Following, a bunch of meta horror films in the late 90s, early 2000s. He told director Tom McLaughlin that this film had a huge influence on him growing up and helped him to inspire to write those films, or specifically Scream later on, which you can. I feel like there's a lot that helped to move towards that meta textual look at horror in the late 90s. A lot of that started with like this, where franchises kept going on, and you started seeing people like breaking the fourth wall or bringing things up in like conversation where it's like, oh yeah, like who doesn't know how to survive this or this and that kind of helped to sow those seeds so that later, yeah, Kevin Williamson would come back and be like, hey, I got a film called Scream, which McLaughlin was actually offered the chance to direct. He declined, but during that process, that's when he had talked to Kevin Williamson, who told him all about how the film inspired him. And then eventually I went to Wes Craven, obviously, and Wes Craven went from there. And you can kind of see that he kind of was going towards that trend anyways with A New Nightmare, so it kind of worked perfectly. Like, you had this writer who already was looking at doing a kind of deconstruction of the horror genre, and them two together just created this perfect film, Scream. This is a little crazy. This is the first and only film in the series that's including, the later films by New Line Cinema and the 2009 reboot, that it doesn't feature any nudity. There is a sex scene, but when Tom McLaughlin had approached actress Darcy DeMoss, she refused to appear topless in the scene, and he kind of later admitted that he was uncomfortable with it about suggesting it to her, and it was more to appease producers, and they felt that hardcore audiences had come to expect it. And that's kind of crazy when you think, like, okay, kind of smack dab in the middle of this huge franchise where it's known for, exploitation a little bit, and it's known for like all these like kills and gore and this and that, and they decide, at least with this film, it decides, we're gonna buck that trend of featuring nudity, especially when there's like 12 films. So yeah, like halfway through the franchise, they're just like, yeah, we're just not gonna do it because we don't feel like we have to. Good on them. That's something that the 80s took advantage of, and then I would say even like in the 90s and early 2000s, where it was like common to just have that in there to kind of sell more, to just get those people who just want to see topless women or whatever. And it takes away from the film. It doesn't necessarily take away from the film. I would just say that when they're just trying to do it so that it's like they can get away with like nudity, because I have seen films that do that, where they forego having a good story or any like effects for, oh yeah, we can get away with nudity. That's when it's ridiculous, and it's like that's not why you use nudity at all. So the film's music was composed by Harry Manfredini, who composed the scores to all the series' previous installments. In addition to the original score, the soundtrack also featured 3 songs from Alice Cooper and a song from Felony. That song was I'm No Animal. The songs that were from Alice Cooper are Hard Rock Summer, Teenage Frankenstein, and then, of course, He's Back, The Man Behind the Mask. It featured the famous Kiki Mama, which is heard in the film, obviously, when Jason's About to Kill. It was a minor chart success, popular among fans of Alice Cooper, and it had a music video, which the song was well known for its music video, because it did combine clips of Jason Lives with original footage featuring Cooper performing the song, and Jason Voorhees played as he's in the film by C.J. Graham, menacing teenagers at a midnight showing of Jason Lives. Yeah, I gotta watch this. I've never seen it, but I gotta watch that music video. Sounds pretty fun. I love Alice Cooper, and yeah, this would be pretty good to see. All right, so overall, I would say that these three films are pretty good in the whole franchise, or the franchise as a whole. I say that the first three were really there to kind of just set things up. That's kind of what they feel like. The first one, especially, and then the second one too, is kind of more a reestablishing to let you know that Jason is going to be the killer going forward. Then we get into the third film, and it's more of just like the same thing over and over again. I'm glad that they kind of saw that they were like, oh, you know what? We're kind of in a rut. Let's just kill off Jason, right? And then they could try and move on to more like different things, right? But then they obviously stumbled, made a mistake with the execution, I would say. Not the idea, because, like I said, I think the idea of changing up who is doing the killing, would actually be pretty interesting. And even trying to change up the story, kind of like what Halloween 3 did, where they tried to do something a little bit different. Just kind of give the audiences like a little bit, especially with a series called Friday the 13th, you could do something a little bit different with it each time. But as we see, audiences during the 80s kind of just wanted the same thing over and over again. They just wanted to see kids get killed by a menacing, hulking figure who all they do is walk around and kill. And, even just looking at the three Jasons, well, the still alive Jason, who is in the final chapter and gets killed by Tommy Jarvis. Just seeing him, and I think when you get to the third in the Tommy Jarvis trilogy, I think that's when we start to see the Jason that everyone really knows. Because we've already seen him. I would say you kind of get to see it start in the third one, and the fourth one really kind of solidifies, like, okay, this is Jason that we know. And then he gets killed. And then with Roy, I think they kind of tried to encapsulate the same feeling, but giving you like subtle hints that like this is someone different. And then when it's revealed it's someone different, it is a little bit disappointing that it's not someone that they were already setting up to be Jason, like Tommy. That it's just some kind of throwaway character. That's where I think it stumbled a lot. But then when we get into his resurrection in Jason Lives, where you get to see this Jason that is more undead, that's super strong, that because you could see in the first, or in the second, third, and fourth, that he is still kind of human. He does take a while to from blows to get up. Right away in this one, in the sixth one, in part 6, Jason Lives, you can see that that's where we understand that, oh, okay, he's more of like I would compare him to like a Solomon Grundy, where you can damage them, but they will just keep coming back no matter what. We see that he gets literally chained to a rock and dumped into the lake. And, obviously, the series isn't done. We're going to see him come back. So, yeah, it's this kind of idea of that we now understand that he's more beyond what he was before. The first 5 films gave us a more human Jason. Now we're getting into the undead Jason, the one that I think most people know and most people are used to. and I think that's great because from here on out, now it's going to be like this progression to see how he decomposes, to show how the mask just starts getting like more damage because you already see that axe um, slice in his mask, but every film now will kind of show more and more of the damage and more of this progression of him being this undead creature, monster, person, being, whatever. And yeah, I mean, this honestly, I would say, yeah, this is because I mean, it is the halfway point, but this is the Jason that I think of when I think of Jason. This one that just walks around, going around just bulldozing through humans, and he can take shots, he can take damage, and really just kind of shrug it off. One crazy thing is like when we get into like the numbers, which I wish I would have gotten to last time, but that one I was still feeling kind of sick, so I kind of just wanted to wrap it up a little bit. But I will get into it in this one. So for the final chapter, and we obviously know it's not the final chapter. This one has 13 kills overall by Jason, which is okay. Yeah. It's not the most. It's not the least. And actually, in overall amount of kills, this is number 8. So that is towards the lower end of the amount of kills, but it will start racking up a lot more as we get into it. On to A New Beginning. Obviously, Jason's not in that one, so there's obviously no kills by Jason. But that's not fair to Roy. So Roy actually kills 17 people, which is more than Jason killed in the final chapter. So I mean, at least he did get in a good amount in there. But sadly, it is still not Jason. So I don't know if you'd be able to count that really. So let's see where did Jason lives? Oh, right there, number 4 on the ranking. He killed 18 people in that film. Dang, that's a lot of people. I mean, it's still not a lot compared to later films where he basically goes on a rampage and just murders whoever comes in contact with him. But this is still where we start getting to see that higher kill count, and it's great that it's right in the middle, kind of showing that like guys, from here on out, we're giving you Jason. This is where Jason comes in and is taking over, guys. He's gonna run all over you, brother. And I would say this is what makes Jason and Friday the 13th as a whole, the franchise, what's so special and why people like it, is because you're not going to see it for the story. You're not going to see it for what it has to progress in plot wise or what it has to do with like anything like that. We're going to see it because we're going to go see Jason killing a bunch of kids, teenagers, not kids, and terrorizing this camp, or I guess later terrorizing space, and I guess Freddy. But we'll get there eventually. And God, this franchise is just so long and it's so ridiculous. It has so many bumps, but I think that's what makes it great and lovable to everybody who loves the franchise. They love it for all the bumps and hiccups and all the things that it gets right and all the things that it gets wrong with different characters, not just Jason, but like the background characters that we get to see, the Tommy Jarvises and the Mrs. Voorhees and everything all over the place, but that's why we love it. So I like to say thank you guys for being very patient. I know it took a while to get this one out, and it's probably going to take a while to get the next one out. So I'm probably going to give you another Scaries episode and some news. Also, I'll probably give you a couple of reviews in between too, just to kind of pad things out because I noticed that it was just taking a little while to get these ones done. My job doesn't allow really yet to maneuver around. It eats up a lot of my time. But hopefully you guys will still stick around. Thank you for listening again. If you have any suggestions for what I should review in the future, or you have any personal scary stories, I love personal scary stories. Anything you want me to talk about, or anything you want me to read on here, even if it's not true, if it's a true story, if it's something that you want me to review that I haven't even thought to review. Yeah, come on, bring it on. I'll review it. Anything horror, come on, guys. I'll do it all. But yeah, if you want to reach out to me, I'm at Horrorbox Podcast on Instagram. It's Horrorbox Podcast at gmail.com. If you'd like to send anything through there, and then also you can DM me on Instagram. But you can also DM me on Twitter. I'm at HorrorboxPod also. I try to stay up on Twitter because it is a little bit easier than Instagram. Rather than just posting a photo, you can kind of respond and you can kind of just tweet out things. But you guys can hit me up at any time and you can let me know what you guys think. Honestly, the more feedback I get, the better for you, the better for me, because then I can adjust accordingly. I think I'm getting a little bit better at all this that I previously was. So hopefully you're sticking around, you're listening. Yeah. So till next time, guys, we'll find out what comes out from the horror box.
You're with your baby.